You are listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Radio Hour podcast. I'm your host, Justin Beahm. Today, we've reached episode 40. Amazing. And my guests are Scott Schirmer and Brian K. Williams. They're the minds behind the upcoming film GUSH, and also a favorite of mine from over the last, decade here, Harvest Lake, which came out in 2016, as well as a whole host of other films that they've both been involved in, like Headless, The Bad Man, and Space Babes from Outer Space. I mean, these guys have had a really adventurous catalog, and they have lots of good stories to tell from the trenches of indie filmmaking. We get into everything from production into their process as a writing and producing team, and now directing team together on GUSH, as well as how they handle fundraising campaigns for social fundraising, which they've used on a number of their pictures very successfully most of the time. So I think you're going to love the conversation. They're interesting guys who put all their heart into what they're creating and doing it on a truly indie basis. As far as updates with me, as usual, it's been a really busy fall. For Reverend, some recent releases that you can get the lowdown on at justinbeahm.com include Umbrella's Full Moon box set, Volume 1, the A Simple Plan 4K and Blu-ray from Arrow Video, Krampus, The Gift, and Mike Flanagan's Hush on 4K and Blue from Shout, as well as some magazine articles that are currently on your newsstands, like in Scream, which has part 2 of my Night of the Demons retrospective, Rue Morgue, which has an interview with Scott Beck and Brian Woods on Heretic, and then there's always Remind magazine from TV Guide. That's my monthly column in there called Roadside Memories that's focused on defunct roadside attractions and amusement parks. In addition, I've been cast and actually have already done my bit for Concept Media's upcoming film, Mr. Buzzkill, that I'm really excited to play the voice of a DJ in. And then also I'm a narrator at the end of the film. Mr. Buzzkill has an Indiegogo campaign going for a couple weeks yet. There's a link to that on the website where you can get cool perks like Blu-rays and just a whole bunch of other stuff. So I love doing things with Concept Media and Sean Burkett. That's the company that I did Betsy, also released as Animal Inside with. That's the movie where I played a cop, which was an absolute blast to shoot out in Ohio. I also did just a little tiny bit in their Bigfoot film Stranded, maybe a year or so ago, a couple years ago now. So I always love what those guys are doing. Really, really fun. Mr. Buzzkill is no exception. I've also landed my first couple of audiobook gigs, which I'm very, very thrilled about. Loving getting into that audiobook realm. And if you have a book that's on Amazon, I'm all set up on ACX, which is their audiobook narration section. So if you have a book looking for a narrator, I would love to hear from you. You can find me on there, and then you can send me a suggested project. I'll certainly be happy to take a look. The biggest thing in relation to the Radio Hour is the Patreon account that just announced. If you go to patreon.com/the Justin Beahm Radio Hour, or just search for the show's name there, or linked from my side, of course, you'll find that I have a number of tiers, I think 4 different tiers on there that offer all kinds of cool stuff, from bonus episodes to live events to having a vintage horror magazine mailed to you every month directly from my collection. I have 4Ks and Blu-rays, DVDs, things like that available there. So there's so many different options. Surely something that fits your budget and you would be supporting this show, which I've decided after years of thinking about this and struggling, if I wanted to go the route of traditional sponsorship, and I wanted to find a way to offer a more interactive element for the program. And Patreon definitely offers that through there's a lot of different options in there for different ways to directly connect, and think of it almost like an NPR kind of a thing. I donate every year to PBS and to NPR. I'm a real big believer in what both of those entities are doing. So my approach here is basically the same thing, where I'm looking for your help to keep the show humming and to keep it free from ads for mattresses and whatever else you hear on so many other podcasts. No shame in their game at all. I'm just saying, for me, It's not necessarily the kind of way that I want to go about this. And I didn't want to do any kind of blanket advertising package deal with someone where they could throw ads in for anything, whether I believed in it or not. So this is the route that I'm taking for now. And I really, really do appreciate your support. You can find the links at justinbeam.com, or again, if you just search for my name, the show name, over on Patreon, you can look it up and get signed up on there. I already have a number of active members on there that I wanted to thank. So a big shout out and a huge thank you to Brian Godsill, Derek Donovan, and Sean Davis for being the first pioneers through to the Radio Hour podcast Patreon. So thank you, fellas. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope everyone will take time to check that out. Apologies, too, for my slightly hoarse voice this week. I've been dealing with some sort of a cold that's nagging. Seems to be hanging around here. But let's get into this conversation with Scott Schirmer and Brian K. Williams on GUSH. I'll be posting the link to their Indiegogo campaign in the comments for the show. They're running that right now for finishing funds on their film, and I'm so excited to see this thing. And I do encourage you to take a look at that campaign and see if there's anything that catches your eye there. You're definitely supporting artists on the independent front who are out there working hard to give you some entertainment. So check that out, GUSH on Indiegogo. That's GUSH. Here are Scott and Brian. Scott and Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm really excited to chat with you guys. I'm a huge fan of your work. I mean, Brian, I've known you for a number of years now, but
Yeah.
I'm just God, I love what you guys do together. And so thank you for being here.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
We've kind of always wanted to do a podcast with you over the years, and I feel like we were close a few times, so it's nice to finally meet you and talk.
Yeah, I think we did, geez, back probably around Harvest Lake would have been the first time, maybe something like that. But we're here today to talk about a lot of things. Right now, you guys are in the middle, or yeah, I would say the middle of production on GUSH, your newest film. And this is the first time you guys have had a chance to get back together in a couple years, right?
Yeah.
Gosh, more than 6 years since we've worked together. It's maybe even 7 or 8 years, hasn't it?
I think it's been about 8 years since we worked together. The last thing you and I did together was Space Babes, and that was released right before Ellie and I moved down to Atlanta, and we've been here for about 7.5 years. So yeah, it's probably been about 7.5, 8 years since we worked together.
That's
And
crazy.
Brian made 2 movies down there in Atlanta pretty soon after he moved, and I made 1. But since either of us has made any movie, it's been 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And Brian, you've been hard at work doing crew work and everything. Can you sort of fill everybody in on what you've been doing in Atlanta and what drew you there?
Initially, what drew me here wasn't working on the big stuff with the union. It was just the fact that it was here, and I felt like a lot of opportunity to still make the independent lower budget stuff, but have access to more equipment, better crew, just because I had a lot of friends that worked at rental houses that would rent out, grip equipment and lighting equipment. And I was good friends with a Beahm, who also was a mixer on a lot of big budget films and productions. Jimmy Bickert lived down here, and he was wanting to get going on a women in prison film called Amazon Hotbox. So when we first moved down for the first couple of years, I worked on Amazon Hotbox, and then immediately after that, jumped into Jesse's Supernormal Regular Average Day. And part of that was you can't just move into a IATSE location and join the film union. You have to be a resident of that state for, I believe at the time it was 2 years, and now I believe they've lowered it to 1.5 years.
Sure.
And that kind of helps stop people from just flooding an area where the industry is going and taking work away from the local people.
Yeah, absolutely. And Atlanta's really become Hollywood East. Yeah.
Yeah. We call it Yollywood down here.
I remember my buddy Tyler Main and his family moved there too. I mean, it just seems like there's been a real mass exodus from LA in a lot of ways
Oh
out
yeah,
there.
ab- absolutely. There's been I've worked. I mostly have been doing grip and rigging grip work, and there's been a lot of folks from the camera department and grip department, lighting department that have come down here from Hollywood, and it's kind of been a little bit of a situation to some degree, just because uh, everyone does the job so differently, and you hear a lot of people say, "Well, that's how we. This is how we do it in Hollywood." And it's like, "Well, that's great. You're in Atlanta. This is how we do it here."
It's not the same. When did you guys meet? When did you two first encounter each other?
We
I
were
think
talking about this a
Brian,
while back. We have different memories of it.
yeah, my memory's not as good as Brian's. It's not as good as most people's actually. But my first memory of meeting Brian was when he came to a double feature of Found and a movie by Josh Hull. Um, do you remember that title, Brian? Something Lane.
Beverly
Anyway,
Lane.
Beverly Lane. Yeah, it was a double feature in somewhere here in Indiana, and he just showed up, and I remember meeting him there, and I went and ate with him at the Waffle House after that double screening, and that was the first time I remember meeting him. But Brian says that there was an earlier time as well.
Yeah, I was at my memory was that we were at Horror Hound Weekend in Indianapolis, and I believe that's when you were screening Found for the Elvira's uh, horror haunt competition, and we picked up a DVD from your table, and I had done photography for years, but I was not aware of the Canon DSLR that would shoot in 24 frames per second and make something that actually looked like a film. And I watched Found, and I was blown away by it. And in the end credits, Scott put in there that the film was entirely shot on a Canon 5D, I believe is what it was. And
70.
I'm 70, and I'm watching those credits, and I'm like, wait a minute, I know what that is. I have a Nikon that's a similar DSLR. Is this a possibility? I had
Hmm.
no idea. And that's what that watching that movie, realizing that it was shot in and around Bloomington, Indiana, on an affordable DSLR camera is 100% what ignited my passion and into making my own films, because I literally had no idea it was even possible before I watched that. I thought, oh yeah, you got to go to Hollywood to make a movie. You got to have a super expensive 35 millimeter camera with, the film stock and processing. So that just blew my mind.
Oh yeah. Well, even before that, I had made several movies on VHS and those little what are the I don't remember what they're called, the small little tapes. But none of it looked like real film, and I just hit a wall after so many years of filming that, of making movies that way, because they would never look better than they did. So I
Yeah.
kind of gave up making movies for several years until a friend of mine, Aaron Marshall, told me about these new Canon cameras and how you could shoot actual films on a camera that looks like a still camera. And I said, you're talking, this is nonsense. You're pulling shit out of your butt. And no, it was true. And when I saw that that was the new reality, it really ignited my desire to make film again.
It's an incredible time right now with the accessibility of the means to do this stuff. And not even just talking DSLRs and things like that, but also the resolution that's on phones and things and the adapter
Yeah.
lenses and all that stuff. What do you guys think about the more democratic environment around film right now? This is something that I love to dive into with people who are out there doing it because there's a number of different perspectives on how much film is being shot and fed to streaming services and things like that right now. What do you guys think about the current environment?
I think I'm of two minds about it, as I bet a lot of people are probably. It's nice that we all have the opportunity to make films that have high quality to the point where most people in the audience would not be able to tell the difference between what we're doing and what, Fox or Paramount are doing. But on the downside, there's so much content now. There used to be gatekeepers,
Yeah.
and the gatekeepers kept out a lot of the poor content. And now that anyone can make a movie, anyone is making a movie. And a lot of those movies, unfortunately, just aren't very good. Just like our first movies aren't that good. I mean, I made a lot of movies before Found, and there's a reason nobody's heard of them.
Yeah, and I think now with the way it is, I mean, I know when I made my first couple films and short films, and I was very proud of them, and I thought they were great. And I know they're not, and I feel like you and I both got together and separately are just we're getting better and better as we move along. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have that same path. They get fed their ego that oh well, I'm streaming on Tubi or whatever, and that's great, and it is great. I agree with you. I think I have both mindsets of it as well, but at the same time, sometimes you need to hear like, well, actually, this is a piece of shit, and to take yourself down a little bit and to try to get better and grow. And I think a lot of folks, unfortunately, don't do that. They just kind of get stuck with, well, I made a movie, and while that is a miracle in itself, even though it is, we have such easy access to phones and cameras and equipment that can make it look and feel like a real film. There's still a lot to be said about having someone good who knows how to edit properly, the sound, the lighting,
Right.
the screenplay, who your actors are, how well they're directed. And sometimes I think people think, oh no, you just hit record on your iPhone and point it somewhere, and that's how you make a movie.
Yeah, it's a unique moment. It really is. And I think Tubi is one of the platforms that seems to really, I mean, it's just exploding with content. And I've also heard that they're a pretty reliable entity though when it comes to taking care of filmmakers. Have you guys found that to be the case in terms of payouts and things like that?
Yes,
Absolutely,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Tubi
They
is
are
a
the best.
godsend for us.
Yeah. And some of the others aren't as good, or they change their percentages and things like that, right? Like the landscape is still, it's like the Wild West. No one's conquered it. No one's really mastered the streaming thing. And I use the term streaming just generally for anything that's not physical, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's not,
Amazon broke our hearts because Amazon, I think, started it. I
mhm,
think my memory is that Amazon was the first big company that offered an opportunity for people at our level
yeah,
to kind of have our stuff out there streaming to the world. And at first, the percentages were good, and then month after month, year after year, they took more and more and more to the point where I don't even know if you can make much money on Amazon now as a filmmaker. But Tubi is very kind. We've had so much success on Tubi, and I would say that Plex and Pluto have also been pretty good for us.
yeah. But to be, we have our concerns and fears with it too. It's been good for several years, but always feel like we're just waiting for the hammer to drop on indie guys with them as well. And one example of that kind of started that fresh in our mind when we first released Space Babes. It was on Tubi, and it was only on there for a couple months, but it exploded. It was like, oh my gosh, maybe we can actually do this for a living and make a living. And then out of the blue, they our sales agent called us and was like, "Hey, yeah, sorry, Tubi is removing Space Babes due to content reasons." And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, Space Babes is a lighthearted sex romp comedy. It was like my tribute to USA Up All Night days, and there's not a mean bone in its body. It just has some cupcake fun nudity in it, and
yeah.
not even graphic, but and then it just becomes frustrating because right after that, I was like, well, let me see what else they've removed. It's like, okay, they still have Sallow, they still have Irreversible, they have like all these movies with much more graphic, hardcore content, and it just makes you wonder why. And it also makes us wonder what could have been because Space Babe still performs really well on other platforms, but Tubi being the one that paid out the best, it's like, man, if it would have stayed there, who knows what we could have done.
Is there any kind of appeal process for that for you to find out what led to the poll?
Not
We
that
didn't
I'm aware
pursue
of.
it.
What'd you say, Scott?
We didn't pursue it, so I don't know if there is. I just don't know about it.
Hmm. It seems like they should let you, I mean, at least let you know why that kind of thing would happen.
Boy, that'd be nice. But just like Facebook
Yeah.
and YouTube, they just censor you and they don't tell you why, and sometimes it's perplexing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love Harvest Lake so much. It is a film that I continue to talk about to people when I'm at a festival or a convention or something, and there's people saying, "Oh, there's nothing fresh. There's nothing new that really that's outside the norm. It's all sort of rinse and repeat." I'm like, you need to check out Harvest Lake. It is so beautifully shot. It's got like no boundaries to it. It's a fun story. It's intriguing. The effects are awesome in it. I would like to first ask you guys about, I know there's been other films and things, but I would love to hear about Harvest Lake and how that project came together.
Brian, you want to start?
Well, sure. I'll try to make it short, and you jump in whenever you want to, Scott. But in my
Okay.
opinion, it all started when we were in post production of a movie called The Legend of Wasco. I was not working with Scott necessarily. I was hired to shoot uh, with Leah Taylor, The Legend of Wasco, which was a movie that was a nightmare in itself for a myriad of reasons. But long story short, somebody else got the opportunity to make this film specifically for Redbox. And went silent. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you're here.
Yeah. Sorry. Um, for Redbox, and they were in the middle of production for something else, so they offered it to Forbidden Films, which was the company that Scott and Arthur and Shane and Leah had. And I don't remember the exact date, but it was literally something like a 6 month
No,
time
not
frame
even.
from.
We had three
Was it
months
not
to
even that?
write. We had 3 months to write, shoot, produce, deliver. So it was the most, but it was our first like job for hire, so we were excited about it and we took it. And in hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have. But as hellacious as that shoot was, Brian was the DP and I was one of the producers, and we got to know each other really well on that set. That's where it started, and we
Yeah,
just
and
talked.
post production too. I basically lived with you, Arthur, and Leah for a, several weeks while you were editing, and I was coloring upstairs. Like I'm coloring the footage as you're going through the edit, and uh, you you had you had quit your job, if I remember correctly, around that
Yeah.
time with hopes and dreams of giant found money.
Yeah, we were told so much money was coming in from Found. We had more than $50,000 that Found had made before for various reasons that money never got to us. But yeah, I'd quit my job and I was full-time filmmaker at the time.
Mm.
And I had just lost my job, so I was focusing fully on post production of Wasco, and Scott and I were talking. It's like, man, this is fun, and I don't have a job. You don't have a job. Let's just try to do this full time, and let's make another movie. That was step one. Let's make another movie. So we started discussing the skeleton for Harvest Lake when we were still in post production for Wasco, and I think in its very infancy, it came from uh, Deep Dwellers, which was one of the VHS, the other VHS uh, that uh, the boy watches and found instead of Headless. And then it kind of evolved from there, and we would just go out to this park. Can't remember the name of it in Bloomington.
Yellowwood.
Uh, Yellowwood State Park in the woods, and we'd walk around and said, "Man, the woods are free. The woods are a free location, and we have access to them." And just kind of stem from there. And then it wasn't long after we had a script and we were shooting.
It was pretty weird. I have tried to collaborate with people in the past, and even though they were good friends of mine, you either gel or you don't, and you can either do it or you can't. And for whatever reason, when Brian and I would talk after the long days and nights working on the Wasco movie, we just really were in sync. and it shocked me because he's so different from me in so many ways you wouldn't believe it.
Hmm.
Like, it's just insane, our taste in movies and everything. But there was enough overlap, and we could both talk about all that stuff in the overlap so much that Harvest Lake came together very quickly. It was very easy to write. It was a nice movie to shoot. It was just so easy. Like, the movie gods might have been watching over us, because I don't know that very many people have the opportunity to collaborate that easily and that well with anyone. So it's a blessing for sure.
That's amazing. And you brought forward some people from your team too, like Arthur Culliford heading up the special effects team and everything. Boy, they did a nice job on this.
Well, I'm sure Arthur would appreciate hearing that. We were very hard on Arthur. We had we were very demanding with the effects, and I think we went into this movie, as we did all of our movies, saying this isn't an effects laden movie. Well, whenever we say that, that's just not the truth. It's always an effects laden movie. And Arthur is the kind of guy that never says no. Whatever you want. Like, if I said, Arthur, we need a werewolf transformation, he's like, okay, we'll do it. He like never hesitates. So then it's like, will he be able to pull it off? And like many effects artists, we have learned over the years, you don't often get to see the final result until you shoot it. Like, effects people work to the very last minute
Yeah.
to get the thing done. So I remember Brian and I we had a lot of anxiety because we really wanted to see these things, at least a day before we'd shoot. But a lot of times, nope. You get what you get on the day of, and thankfully, most of it was really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think me specifically, I remember really freaking out because I, I had way less experience just in general, but I had even less experience collaborating with people because the only thing that I had really done of any kind of note before then was Time to Kill. And that movie, I wrote it, I shot it, I did the sound, I did the effects, I edited it, I scored it. I didn't really have anyone to collaborate with or bounce ideas off of other than Ellie, and she was a giant help. But I was used to. I'm a planner. I've my whole life I've always said proper planning prevents poor performance, and to me, to not know, to have other people's money, your money, no job, all synced into making this film, and to not be able to see what an effect is, a giant effect is going to be, was just making me want to pull my hair out. I was so concerned.
And then when you saw the stuff,
Yeah, it turned out great.
yeah.
It's like Scott said, it's just a hard thing. I'm also kind of like a realist, I guess, and it's hard for me to understand, to ask someone for the moon and they just say, "Yep."
Yeah. You guys and your collaboration and your team that you put together here, it seems like it's kind of, I mean, you've built this trusted base with the people that you're bringing forward into most all the films that you guys do together. And I'm curious, when you have something new that you guys are getting off the ground and discussing, is it sort of an all call meeting for people and like, hey, this is the next thing, this is what we're going to do, who wants to do what? Or is it a building process where you have to figure out who's available? I mean, how does that work for you guys in terms of assembling the team on your next production?
It's not an all
It
call, because
really,
that would lead to chaos. We know
yeah,
too many people. Everybody always wants to be a part of every movie, and we wish there was a place for everyone on every movie. Like, there are some actors that we would love to work with again, and it's just a matter of whether they're right for the part or not. So instead, what we do is we kind of know who we have in our quote unquote stable, and like on Plank Face, we wrote almost every part in that movie for someone we knew,
Mm,
because making movies without any money or on micro budget like us, most of our movies are 8 grand or less. There's so many challenges just to get through the day that you don't need the wild variable of an actor you don't know that well, being on set and potentially causing problems that you can't foresee until you're on the day.
yeah.
So we know Ellie and Jason and Crow and all these actors we've worked with before, and we know how easy they are to work with. And what's more, we've been blessed with knowing some actors who are fearless. And
yeah,
fearlessness, I've talked about several times. It's very hard to find actors as fearless as these actors who will strip nude for scenes. They will scream and scream. They will cry and cry. They will go to the absolute ends of the earth for you. And that's something that I don't know how we lucked out on meeting these actors, but once we realized at a certain point that we had them, we knew them, and they were with us and they liked working with us, you'd be stupid not to go back to those kinds of actors and work
Yeah.
with them over and over again, because trying to find someone new that you can trust that quickly and who can go to those limits and not be embarrassed or self-conscious is damn near impossible to find. We've
Yeah.
been extremely blessed with actors, especially.
Yeah, and really, as far as the call collaboration, who we work with, it begins even before that, just with Scott and I, because we both love to write, we both love to direct, we love to edit. So that kind of process of who's going to do what with the film between the two of us is kind of where it starts a lot of times as well.
Yeah. What did you learn as a cinematographer on Harvest Lake?
Uh, I learned that I love black magic cameras. That's really the uh. I- So that was the first film. No, Wasco technically was the first film when at the time I had the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, which had a sensor that had a life to it. It had like a just a kind of built-in grain that that really looked like 16 millimeter film, way more so than the DSLR cameras.
Hmm.
And and it had a even smaller uh form factor than a DSLR, so it was really quick and cheap and easy to fly it on a gimbal and get those kind of shots. And uh, it also was the first time that I had worked with raw footage, where the footage out of the camera is raw, desaturated. There's no white balance or color baked into the footage, so you have the freedom in post to really shape the every single clip of how you want it to look and make it look much more filmic. And that alone excited me, just as someone who's always loved holding a camera and working with a camera. And more than anything, I guess that taught me more of the post production color side of color science of of uh, filming, and that also carried over with on the day of setting up shots and looking for things that you're aware of what you can do with it in post.
Yeah, thinking of the edit. So shooting with the assembly in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Those cameras are amazing. That's what I use too. I use Blackmagic and they're so easy to mount on just about anything. And they're just it's really an amazing camera that can do a lot. So for anyone who's listening and looking for a way to get into something without having to drop a ton of money, those Blackmagic
yeah.
cameras are just, I mean, I recommend it to anyone who's looking to elevate their game.
Well,
Yeah,
Brian's
I
upgraded to a very pricey model of Blackmagic camera. I would say if you're beginning, you don't need to get the pricier models. They have a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera that is very tiny, and just to look at it, you would go, "Oh God, I can't make a movie with that. That looks like a phone. It looks ridiculous." We shot Harvest Lake and Plank Face and Space Babes with that camera,
Hmm.
and it is so small that you can move quickly. And when you're starting out, you need to move quickly. Big, heavy cameras have to be on a tripod. That tripod and that big, heavy camera have to be moved around from shot to shot. You wouldn't think going into it, but it adds up. The amount of time really adds up. Those pocket cinema cameras were so easy to move, so quick to move. We could shoot faster with them. I highly recommend the pocket cinema cameras, especially for beginners.
Speaking about
yeah.
budget, and you guys were talking about the, 8,000 usually or less per picture. We're talking about cameras here. I'd like to hear about how you guys handle lighting because in terms of time on set, that can take a big chunk of it too. Do you guys run with a standard kit for all of your productions, or what do you guys have for your outfit?
For the first several films, really, all the stuff that Scott and I did together in the past. Uh, when I tell people in the industry what we did, they just can't believe it. I think we had maybe 3 or 4 little bicolor uh, LED square lights that are maybe like 6 inches by 12 inches, and that was it. We didn't have a gaffer. We didn't have anyone to bounce. We didn't have anybody to do anything.
Wow.
It was literally Scott, me, and a sound person, and that was it. And we just took our time. Scouting is very important. Where you're going to shoot, knowing the location, knowing where the sun's coming from, and just really working as much as we could with natural light in the woods.
And that's where that pocket cinema camera came in really handy because it was extremely sensitive to light. So if we were trying to use like a Canon 7D at that point, it wouldn't have worked. Shooting plank face inside the cabin where there's no light hardly at all, we had to have a very light sensitive camera in addition to those lights that we had. We made it work.
and
We
and
made it work.
and really fast glass too. Being able to step way down, like, point 1.8 aperture, and just have your lens wide open and be able to just really have a good eye for the focus, because you have a very shallow depth of field when you're shooting that wide open.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
since then, when I moved to Atlanta and started working on larger things, it really gave me an indication of, I just learned a lot. I learned a lot about lighting, about just the whole concept of filmmaking in general. And since then, when I made Amazon Hotbox with Jimmy Bickert down here, we had some old tungsten like mole lights, big powerful lights, and we had a whole grip department that was with us there. Robert Alvarez, that's where I first started working with him, and he works as a rigging electric in the union down here, and we're good friends. And I had him help me on Jesse Supernormal Regular Average Day, and by that time I had Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K, and we had access to a bunch of lights from friends of ours, and that was a lot of borrowing. And then when we did Gush, uh, I was like, okay, I know how to make things look better now. I know how to light properly. I know what I need to do it. So I still didn't go big time money because we're poor independent filmmakers, but I just got a handful of cob lights, like chip on boards, that and some soft boxes and magic lanterns, and uh, was able to get some grip equipment, and know how to use it and to shape the light a lot more. And for a first half of the shoot of Gush, Jason Crow helped a ton. He was basically my right hand man as far as the camera department, to help me with diffusing light and bouncing and moving things around and setting up for me. And then on the second half, Robert was able to take a break off of the television show he was working on to come out and help us. And again, just working with someone who understands it in the business, who can, I'm like, all right, we're about to do day for night. I want to light this window. I want this. I don't have to tell him, grab the half CTB gel for he just knows. So
Yeah.
it makes it a lot faster and easier, and very helpful from my standpoint of not having to set the camera down, go get the C stand, go move it, go, just having somebody to help was just, wow, tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah. So what brought you two together for Gush after that sort of span we talked about earlier? And how did you decide to co-write and co-direct together?
What brought us together, Brian? I think
Well,
we both got bored. It had been so long, and Brian was in between shows, and I had struggled with the idea of going back to making a movie because I'd made so many with Brian, and then I made Bad Man without Brian, and it was so hard,
Hmm.
so much more difficult being alone on set, not actually alone, but without a collaborator at that level. So I don't think I could have ever gone back to it unless it was with Brian or with
Oh.
another collaborator I trusted. And I tried to find another collaborator, but it's like trying to find a spouse. Like, it's not that easy, you know?
Yeah.
So when Brian came to me a few months ago saying, I want to make another movie, I was interested. And Brian also had the idea. And in terms of not parsing out who does what, I think it's just because, and Brian, you can jump in here too. On all of our other movies, we both did everything.
Yeah.
I mean, Brian was the DP on some of the movies, and that was like a singular job, and he scored Plank Face. But when it comes to writing and directing and producing and editing, we both did everything. Like, maybe on some jobs one of us did more of one, but it wasn't a solo job. So we just decided this time, let's not even bother with who's directing, who's writing, who's doing it. Like, we're both going to do everything. And we also invited Ellie to be a bigger part of the process too this time, because she always kind of ended up being a bigger part of all the past movies as well. So this time we
Yeah.
just pulled her in as a co-producer.
Yeah. No. I think the thing to say to make all of that stand out and put a pin on it is Scott and I both don't have egos about this sort of thing. And that's one of the hardest things to collaborate with other people. I've had that problem on other folks that I've collaborated with on film. And if you don't have that ego and you really both, like Scott said, we don't have a whole lot in common on like from a day-to-day basis, but the one thing that we absolutely have always had in common is the movie, whatever that is. That is what we care about. That is what we obsess over. That's what we will fight like cats and dogs about with one another, but always come to a conclusion that no one, in my opinion, feels like they had to give up anything. We just really talk things to death until we both see one another's side and point of view and come to an agreement on what's best for the movie.
Exactly. And I know other filmmakers who I've worked with would disagree that I have no ego, but I would counter that by saying, for whatever reason, I learned to trust Brian very quickly. He told me early on he had no ego and that it wasn't going to be a problem, and I didn't believe him. But as I started working with him, especially on Harvest Lake, I discovered he was right. He didn't have ego. None of our arguments were about whether Brian needed to be right or he felt he was right. It was always about, this is what I think is going to be best for the movie. If you
Hmm.
don't think so, tell me why you don't. Tell me why you think your idea is better. Because we both truly believe we want what's best for the movie. And like, even last night, we were watching the rough cut of Gush and we're talking about the last 10 or 15 minutes. And we both have differing ideas about how that should be sequenced. And I don't feel any kind of worry about that. And I don't think Brian does either, because we know we're both going to
No,
plead our cases like a lawyer would litigate a case in court. And we're going to put it together all kinds of different ways. And the truth, even though the truth is sometimes subjective, will come out. And it's not like his point of view or mine. It's just the movie. What does the movie need? And one of us might have the idea that the movie needs, or the other one might. And once the movie has what it needs, it doesn't matter who had that idea or not. I don't even remember whose idea a lot of this stuff
Hmm.
originally was.
yeah,
That stuff just doesn't matter to us. It really is all in service to the movie.
What an incredible lesson for you, Scott, when you embarked on Badman and you found that you felt like you were missing the other half of what you needed in that process. That's such an incredible thing. Did you communicate with Brian during that time and say, "Man, I wish you were on this with me"?
I think so. I think Brian wanted to be there. It just, the timing didn't work out. He was
Yeah.
working with Jimmy on another movie at that time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I
I
couldn't wait. I would have waited if I could, but I had a day job that I was going to start again because independent filmmaking just wasn't quite cutting it. Imagine that.
Yeah.
I
I
wish
had
he
the
were
same
there.
I had the same experience on Jesse when I made that without Scott. Like, while I'm happy with the product, I'm happy with what it turned out. I can absolutely, in hindsight, and it wasn't very long afterwards, is like watch it and just be like, man, I wish Scott would have been here for this. It would have been a better film.
Hmm.
I have said that Scott and I both have our pros and our cons and the things that we excel at and things that we are not, the other might be better at than. And we, in my opinion, we absolutely work better together than we do apart. And we absolutely make a better film together than we do when we're apart.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, Ellie is so central to everything that you guys do. I mean, Brian, you and Ellie are just such an amazing couple. I've always been blown away by you guys. And tell me about that, because you talk about finding people that you trust. I mean, obviously, she, I think it's fair to say, is a muse for you, Brian. And I would love to hear how she was involved with Gush on a bigger scale, and then also just overall, you guys both working with her time and again.
It's one of those things where I feel very lucky to have a life partner that has, I mean, we've been together since she was 14 and I was 15.
Yeah,
And
those pictures of you
I'm
guys
40.
that you
I'm
post online sometimes are so adorable of you guys back in the day.
It's like a damned
and we
Mellencamp song.
It is totally. Yeah.
we never had a little pink house though, uh no, it'd be a whole other podcast to go through that. But I'll just say that we've gone through a lot together in our life, as anyone has, and some of it's pretty gross and disturbing. I was born and raised in a cult, and she was not a part of it. And when we first got married, she had to be a part of it. And I know how gross that sounds, but I was born brainwashed, raised into it.
Hmm.
And you go through that, and then you start living your college years in your 30s when you get out of the cult and the whole world is open to you. It's like Rumspringa, like in a
Yeah.
way, but and you go head first into everything. And I have a lot of friends that I grew up with in that same cult that also got married very young, because that was kind of one of the central things of the cult. You got married young, you had babies, and you preached the word of God. And uh, they those people did not grow together; they grew apart. And somehow, miraculously, Ellie and I grew together,
Yeah.
and we became interested in the same things that we didn't even fully understand in our quote unquote previous life that we knew about. And it's been amazing to have someone in my life that is there for me and cares as much as I do, and more importantly understands that when I'm working on a film, that becomes my muse. And that might sound weird and gross too, but like she understands that I'm going to obsess over this project, and it's going to take more of my time away from her than it should, but that's a part of it because she's been there through it over and over. But during pre-production and production, it's hands-on for her in a big way, and she helps out with so much, like just going wardrobe and set dressing and set design and working on her character. And I push her and she pushes back, and it's I believe that it's it's healthy, and it's something that really helps both of us independently to want to be better. Uh, but at the same time, when you're in the thick of it, especially pre-production, it can be very ugly and frustrating because you're on a timeline to a degree, and you're on a budget, and you just have to have so much communication, and sometimes that communication uh, hits people differently, and uh, they might not have the same mindset that you do all the time.
It can be hard on relationships. It can be, I mean, a lot of production.
Absolutely.
When I was talking with Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel for the upcoming 4K release of Hush, talking to them about when they decided to embark on that film, which was the first time they were going to do that together. And they're like, we're either going to, at the end of this, we're either going to be married or we're going to hate each other forever. And
Yeah.
they, and luckily they found that bond throughout that process. And that's something that I just see in them. And it's so wonderful to see that in you guys, because you talked about fearless earlier. Clearly,
Mhm.
Ellie is completely fearless. in how she approaches what she does.
She is. Ellie is fearless. And I sometimes, and I think she was the first to bring it up when we cast her in Harvest Lake because we'd already worked with her on Headless and Time to Kill. She was saying, you shouldn't put me in every movie because I think we were all sensitive to the fact that Rob Zombie gets a lot of flack for casting his wife in every movie.
Yeah,
And
but
whether or not she's appropriate for every role is up for debate. I actually haven't seen that many Rob Zombie movies, but I loved her in Lords of Salem anyway. But that's besides the point. I wouldn't work with Ellie on every movie if I didn't think she was good for the role, and she's
yeah,
almost always good for the role. Gush pushes her more than she's ever been pushed before, but even Gush doesn't tap her potential, I
hmm,
don't think. I think she's really got all the chops required to work in any kind of big level studio production. She might not know the techniques by name that actors use, but I think she definitely employs some of them without even knowing. And she's just
instinctive.
great to work with. Yeah, she's instinctive, very instinctive,
Yeah,
and she's so good. She always wants to do more takes, and she always wants more direction. And I always tell her, your instincts are so good. The first take is almost always great and doesn't need adjusting. And whenever I do have her do it again, I usually like the first take better anyway.
yeah,
So we've talked about that, and I don't know. She's just good. And Jason Crow is just as fearless as she is.
yeah.
And I think a couple other actors, maybe Tristan Risk
Yep.
is absolutely for Alice Winkler is very fearless. It's just a wonderful quality to have in an actor because if an actor will go to the ends for you, it's so much easier to pull them back. You can't push them. You just can't, but you can pull them back.
Hmm.
And these actors that we work with, I think they know that they should feel free and comfortable to go really far. And if it's too far, we'll reel them back in a little bit.
If you would fill everybody listening in on, give the elevator pitch on Gush. What is the story of Gush?
Oh my goodness. We haven't really practiced doing this yet, have we, Brian?
Round
No, no,
one.
no.
It's about a traumatized author who lost a baby 8 months in prior to the film's start, trying to fall back in love with writing. And when she does, what makes her able to do it is this muse character, this supernatural, otherworldly, is she real or is she not? Type of character that she meets in this house that she goes to write the third book in a trilogy, a horror trilogy. And horror is really hard for her to work with because of what happened to her with losing her baby. And I think Brian and I both relate with this on different levels, but the whether or not to keep making horror movies is something that we struggle with sometimes because the world feels horrific enough in so many ways that we wanted that to be part of the movie. But anyway, Ellie's character ends up falling in love with the Muse. The Muse is a very sweet but potentially scary character, and the Muse and Ellie really do kind of develop a relationship, and it defies the Muse's programming, and the Muse is taking her orders from a much lower power.
Hmm.
And when she starts to defy her programming, she has to become evil. And then Ellie and the Muse come become at odds with one another. And so I don't know. I don't know if that's I just pulled that out of my butt, but hopefully it was kind of close. Do you think, Brian?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I I fell out of love with making movies. I came to Scott with this concept, pitched it to him, and it's in a weird way quasi autobiographical for me because when I joined the union, I remember the first day I was on a big set. I was on season 2 of Doom Patrol, and it's like, hey man, you want to get breakfast? I'm like, sure. Where do we go? It's like, oh, the catering tent right here. And I went out there and looked at this catering tent and saw the waste and saw the money involved in it. I was like, holy cow! Like this breakfast for my first day working on a big budget television show costs more than every independent film that I've made in the past put together.
Hmm.
Like I this is insanity. And I was working with people that that would, in a grip department, for example, that a DP or someone would come in and say, "Hey, like we need to change this entire lighting setup that you guys had set up, and we want to do this instead," and blah blah. And I work with people like, well, they'd be mad, they'd be angry, like, well, why we got to go do that again? And I understood why, because of my history of working on independent films. To them, it's just a job. They don't watch the stuff they work on. They don't care about it. They just care about the paycheck and the benefits. And it kind of soured me, honestly, and made me think like, man, this is just such a disgusting like job and business. I it turned me off of it, and I didn't want to. I told several people like, hey man, when you want to make another movie? I'm like, I'm not. I'm
Hmm.
done. I'm done. I don't want to. I lost my inspiration. I lost my desire. I lost my passion. And that's kind of the the seed that started me going down the concept of this idea.
So you're the writer who's struggling
No,
to find
we.
their
Oh yeah,
inspiration?
yeah, yes. Sorry. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
But I
Interesting.
was able to relate with that too, especially with horror, because I never grew up a horror fan. Most of our audience, I understand, were lifelong horror fans. That it started early in childhood with all the slasher movies of the 80s and stuff. I didn't like horror movies growing up. I thought they were silly and stupid, for the most part. I didn't fall in love with them until college when some friends challenged me to watch a few of the really, really great ones. And lately, horror just hasn't been very comforting to me at all. Like, life is harder as you get older, and the socio-political climate is so tense for all kinds of reasons that I horror is not what I'm not in the mood to make horror. When you're already in a horror movie in real life, trying to make more horror just feels wrong sometimes. So
Hmm.
Brian came up with a concept that I think we were both able to relate with that way, at least tonally.
It looks, from what I've seen of it, obviously there's only so much out there in the teaser and everything like that, but it looks like almost like it's almost like an Italian giallo uh, kind of approach to how you guys film this thing. What kind of look were you aiming for with the picture?
Initially, uh, uh, we did have. It's interesting that you brought that up, because we initially, I remember Scott. We did talk about having a somewhat giallo element to at least parts of the film.
Yeah.
Very voyeuristic in a lot of ways, and of the muse, like watching in on the author and kind of waiting for the right moment to reveal herself and how she does that. Yeah.
I mean, your films really cross a lot of boundaries anyway. You're talking about genre, and I mean, yeah, you have some like horror elements poured into a lot of these things, but you're never sticking just one foot or both feet completely planted in horror. It seems like you guys are really approaching stuff from a storytelling standpoint of just telling a story that's not necessarily
Yeah.
grounded in tropes and things like that. And I love that about what you do with Bandit.
Well, I think every film since Harvest Lake, honestly, it's kind of interesting. We don't, in my opinion, I don't think we do it on purpose. Like I remember with Harvest Lake and Plank Face specifically, we're like, no, we're going to make a horror movie. We're making a horror movie. We're putting both feet in, and it just naturally, the way that we work, it just doesn't turn out that way.
It's true. I remember very distinct conversations after Harvest Lake and Plank Face or during them, where we would be like, we know our fans want a horror movie. We need to give them a horror movie. Horror sells. I absolutely believe that. It's been true forever and it's still true. And even with Gush, we were like, this needs to be a horror movie. Like everything we've done in the past, yes, there's a story and we're not going to commit too much to the trope, but we always start every movie with the intention of mining all the horror we can. And it ends up falling by the wayside to some extent, just in favor of telling what we think is a good story.
Yeah.
And yeah, we don't fight it. Brian and I are both, I think, we believe the movie very quickly and very early on takes on a life of its own. And if you try to force it to become something it doesn't want to be, you're just going to end up with a bad movie. But if you kind of follow what the movie's doing, and this was true on Gush more than anything,
Yeah.
we were rewriting on the set because certain things we would shoot it and we would go, oh my God, well, this flies in the face of what we've written in this other scene, so we've got to change that. So, and even in editing, we're like, this scene's got to go, this scene's got to go, because those were all what the movie used to be. Now it's something else. Harvest, like, I also distinctly remember once we started editing it, we realized it was less of a horror movie and more of like a meditative exploration on sexuality.
Yeah.
Like, we're always in a process of discovery with the movie, and it's the most exciting thing about making movies. If you wrote a movie and storyboarded it and then you only had to replicate it when you're shooting it, that would be the most boring thing ever. And the editing of that kind of a movie would be the most boring thing ever. So Brian and I are always trying to discover during production and post production, what is this movie? And on Gush, I think you can tell that it's evolved because this was the first movie we crowdfunded before we really knew what the movie was. So the early marketing imagery was very much like a ghost story or something, because that was the closest thing we could think of that the movie sort of emulated. And then after we finished production, we were looking at the fundraising page thinking, my God, that doesn't reflect this movie anymore. And so we did a photo shoot to try and show people what the movie really is, which isn't so much a ghost story or a horror movie so much as it's just like a sort of a supernatural, disturbing love story. That's
Yeah.
kind of more what it is. And we didn't know that going in. We were going into it thinking it's a horror movie. We're going to shoot it like a horror movie. And we quickly learned otherwise. You've got to be open to those kinds of changes, I think. It's not good to fight the movie.
Yes, Stephen King says the same thing, that he starts something and he just follows the characters, and it leads him where he needs to go. And he's maintained the same thing, that every time he tries to push back against that, he ends up stuck at some point. And I think that's so great that you guys are kind of eternal students of the things that you're creating as you're creating them, meaning you're so dialed into it that you're able to sort of chameleon into something new, new territory with it. And you guys are really, you mentioned earlier being hands-on the set. Brian, I remember on Time to Kill, you created all those sets yourself, like the whole strip club you built. Wasn't it in your garage or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. That film is such a blast. I absolutely love it so much. And is it similar on Gush? Were you guys building sets and everything, or where did you guys shoot the picture?
Um, well, one of the other things about working with the micro budgets that we do is you kind of have to know what's available to you before you start the process.
Right.
And in my original concept, the author gets sent away to a cabin of her publisher that her publisher owns to just be alone and write and be away from technology and outside influence and that sort of thing. And it occurred to me, I have a friend here named Richie that has a house that he grew up in. His parents have passed, but he still owns it, and it's very old, and it just looks like a set. I mean, it looks like somebody, if you were to go to the construction department on a show and say, "Hey, we need this set," this is what they would have built. And I knew that that was going to be a focal point. So once we got permission from him to film there, that's when we really started jumping into writing the story based around that. And uh, there's a couple other scenes like they're in a cave and an overturned upside down car, and that was a local small film studio here in town. What are they called? Do you remember, Scott?
Digital Thunderdome?
Yeah, yeah, Digital Thunderdome. Scott Hansen owns it. He's a filmmaker as well, and uh, so I went and toured that and took a bunch of uh, cell phone videos for Scott to show him the available sets they had, and then the other set was our home where Ellie and I live. It's like, well, it's already here, and so again, it's just one of those situations where you find. I mean, that's kind of how Space Babes came about. It was like, oh, turns out I
And
have
Blank
access to
Face. and Harvest Lake.
Yeah,
We always write for
yeah.
locations. If we just wrote whatever we wanted, we'd never find most of the locations.
Right.
At our level, you kind of have to figure out what your resources are and then write for them.
Hmm.
But it was all shut down here in and around Atlanta, which was its own unique challenge with Scott and I that we haven't faced in the past because we've always been in the same city in the same room. So I was out here shooting test footage and scouting and my best to share back with Scott while he's back in Indiana. And so unfortunately for him, when he came down here to stay a few days before production started, that was his first opportunity to even step foot on and see the central location of the film.
Sure.
And it's always smaller than you imagine.
How did you guys, how have you found crowdfunding to be? Because I know that a lot of filmmakers go that route. We live in a world where there's not a lot of investors just handing out money to filmmakers. And so, how has the Indiegogo and crowdfunding experience been for you guys?
I would say we got really, really good at it. After Found, Headless did really well, and I think it's because Found had uh, mainstream commercial distribution, and so it
Hmm.
kind of reached a wider audience. That didn't work out for us in a lot of ways, but at least it got the movie out there and we got some exposure. That helped build a platform that for Headless, we wildly succeeded our crowdfunding campaign. I think for us making, I think what was it, around 20 grand on that? That was huge. And then I think we were able to parlay, Brian and I were able to parlay that into Harvest Lake a little, and then even more into Plank Face and even more into Space Babes. And then Jesse Supernatural and or Supernormal and Badman both did really well too. And then COVID happened and there were 6 or 8 years passed and we did this one, and this one's been very different. And we don't
Yeah.
know for sure why it has not succeeded as wildly as our previous ones have. We did meet our fundraising goal, but we're used to surpassing it pretty quickly. So at this point, Brian and I have not made any money on this movie. In fact, we may be losing money at this point, and we
Yeah.
hope that once it's streaming, it'll make us back some money. But on all the previous movies, they all did so well that we were making profit before we even mailed the Blu-rays out to people. And we know other filmmakers are doing very well with their crowdfunding campaigns. So we're still exploring why this one didn't work, but crowdfunding, it's all about building a platform, and a lot of that has to do with your social media reach and how many people follow you and are friends with you. And it's just an ongoing
And I,
battle. And yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was completely off of social media for about 5 years. I didn't even have any accounts anywhere. And, uh, and just being so long in between either of us making films and us making a film together, a part of me wonders if people don't know our history as well, don't know what we've done. And I think also part of why we haven't done as well this time around is this is the first time since your first Badman campaign that we've tried to do a campaign before the film has been shot and completed.
Hmm.
Right.
I will say though, like we were very lucky and blessed to we did get a lot of private donations beforehand for executive producers and associate producers we've worked with in the past that helped us to at least get the film shot and the actors paid and fed and sound and all of that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very lucky for that. And some of those people go all the way back to Found.
Wow.
So we have like a handful of people that no matter what we do, they seem to be inclined to throw a little money at it. And so you got to be grateful.
What would you recommend to filmmakers who are considering doing a fundraising campaign like this? What would you recommend to them in terms of how to run a successful
I
crowdfunding?
would tell I would tell people that you can't do it the first time. The first time you make a movie, you really can't ask people for money. You can, but I don't think you can reasonably expect much because what do they have to look at to know that you're even going to pull it off,
Yeah.
that you're even going to finish it? So I think once you've made something and finish it and it's good, then people will be able to look at that as an example of what you're able to do the second time. And the second time, you might be able to get people to give you money. At least that was my experience because we did a fundraiser for Found, but I think it only made $1,000 or something. Like it didn't make hardly anything at all. And most of it was self-financed by me. I just saved my money until I had about $8,000 and then bought all the equipment and no one was paid. But after Found was made, it got out there, and I think people for the Headless campaign were able to go, oh, well, this is like Found. Well, this is a real thing. They'll finish it, and I'll give money to it. But you've got to build a platform, and those first few steps are hard. You have to come up with something on your own without much assistance that's of good quality. And then you have to have a reputation.
Yeah.
Brian and I have been very proud of our crowdfunding reputation because we saw a lot of other filmmakers fall by the wayside in the eyes of the crowdfunders because they would take too long to complete their film, or in some cases they would take the money and run, and they
Yeah.
just never produced the film. And that ruins your reputation. Like you just can't do that and ever expect to make a movie again. So we only do it because we're absolutely serious. Once the train leaves the station and we announce a movie, it's going to happen, or we'll hurt someone.
Yep.
So you guys, I see in the campaign you're talking about June as sort of a goal date or something for release. What are the plans for Gush in terms of rollout? Are you going to be submitting to festivals? What does the future hold for it?
We're still talking about it.
Yeah.
There's a good chance it'll be done before June. We kind of gave ourselves a further away date than we probably needed to because we already have a rough cut. Like you can actually watch the whole movie
Yeah.
right now with rough sound and no score and no coloring. So, and we're working on it now, and I think maybe next spring sometime it'll be done and we'll be able to send the Blu-rays out hopefully. And I don't know about festivals. I don't know how much I personally care about festivals anymore. There are a couple that we might enter, but I don't know that there's much, at least in North America, I don't know that there's much reason to put a film in festivals because I don't think North American audiences respond to festivals that well. Most of the ones I ever went to weren't very well attended. People just don't care. Laurels on a cover, I've heard from several distributors, are even a detriment.
Yeah.
Like if people watching, browsing for a movie see festival laurels, they immediately assume they're not going to like that movie because it's going to be artsy fartsy. Whereas in Europe, those festivals actually are very well connected to direct distribution. Like, in order to get a distribution deal in Europe, you have to play in certain festivals. So they're different worlds, I think, North America and Europe when it comes to festivals. And so if we're interested in European distribution, which we are, we might pursue some festivals over there. And somebody's already contacted us about that. But in
Interesting.
North America, we like Nightmares Film Festival and I like Nevermore Film Festival. Um,
I've
there aren't
enjoyed
many.
Genre Blast. They've reached out to me already as well, but like that's a good one.
There's
But
some
yeah,
we
like
just like that will enter, but in terms of like doing a wide, broad, like focusing and spending money on it, I don't know that we'll do that again.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's worth it in the way that the market is today. Uh, with our track record and our filmography that we've already had out there, we have really solid relationships with streaming services that can put the money right back into our pockets to be able to survive and hopefully make more films. Whereas the traditional path of pumping it out to festivals in hopes of a distribution deal uh, doesn't appeal to us
Yeah,
because
it just delays getting paid.
yeah,
Sure.
and being able to move on to the next thing, and with your unfortunate uh, experience with distribution, outside distribution with Found, it's kind of soured us since then to
Yep.
we want to keep our film. We want to own our film. We will lease it. We will send it out to non-exclusive streaming services and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, we still own this film.
Yep. Don't make an exclusive deal unless you got money in your hands.
Smart. You mentioned the future, and so that begs the question, are you guys already, is there something brewing for what you're going to do after Gush?
Hopefully, I go back to work and actually make some money so I don't lose my house.
Uh,
But no, in all seriousness, I haven't really thought about it personally a lot. I don't know about Scott, but I am so focused on Gush right now, and I think it has every opportunity to be our best film, best acted, best looking, best sound, all of the above, and that's what I'm focusing on now. Uh, it, it kind of becomes all consuming for me, at least, where I don't think about anything else
sure.
until this current project is as perfect and as completed as it can be, and then I like to rest for about a week.
I still feel like I'm resting from the shoot because we just got
Yeah.
off it last month.
Yeah.
So I'm like, God, do we have to edit it already? So I haven't thought at all. I'm like Brian, I haven't thought at all about the next one or if there even will be a next one. To
Sure.
be honest, I made peace over the last 6 years with letting myself not be a filmmaker because I decided when I was in fourth grade I was going to be a filmmaker. And I've considered myself one since fourth grade up until somewhere in the last 6 years because it just became a no-win game. Like you can keep making movies. It never gets easier. It's always hard. You're always racing the sun. You're always trying to get the money. And it seems like the audience for film has greatly diminished. Movies are so cheap in the eyes of the people who might be a prospective audience for one. They can just wait for streaming, they can watch it on their phone. They're just not a big deal anymore. Movies are not that important to culture. So I've kind of watched my favorite thing on earth in life, film, die over the last like 10 years really. And it's just getting exponentially more so, I think, especially now that the studios are all in such financial dire straits and aren't producing much content at all. So I've kind of really kind of psychologically prepared myself for the actual death of cinema and to not be a filmmaker and to try and like find my joy in something else in life. I'm thinking of becoming a teacher. I'm working towards getting a teaching
Oh,
certificate
cool.
so that I feel like I can do something meaningful because filmmaking is kind of teaching in some strange way. You're sharing your thoughts and ideas with the world. And I feel like if I can't be a filmmaker, the next best thing would probably be a teacher or an author. So I'm trying to give myself permission to try new things because I just don't know how much longer film is going to matter to people. It'll always matter to me, but you can't force the public at large to care about it anymore.
It's really interesting that you both arrived at a similar intersection, though, where you came to the conclusion that you were burned out on it, that it might not be for you. Do you think that your shared perspectives on this heading into Gush, do you think that helped this be a better film?
Hmm.
I don't know. You think about that, Scott, and I'll tell you what I think is made Gush a better film. I think that this, for starters, I had the opportunity to work on big budget stuff. And while I said earlier it soured me, at the same time, I learned a lot about what I did not know about before, as far as just lighting and shaping the light and watching directors work with work work with actors and all of that. I think that helps, and I also think that uh, while even though I agree with what Scott said of it never gets easier, it's always hard and all of that. This is the first film that we were able to work with a small cast that we have worked with many times before, and they have all gotten older, they've all gotten wiser, they've all gotten better, and we were able to have more time to work with the actors on the day to get performance than we've ever had in a previous film. And Gush is very actor heavy. It's all about performance, and there's some amazing performances in it.
Yeah, to some extent, it depends on whether the muse is going to speak anymore. I think for horror, at least my trajectory with Found, Headless, Space Babes was an aberration because it was mostly Brian's baby. I was just helping out. But horror is what I've always done. And Gush still sort of is a horror movie. And I just don't know, like Brian, how interested I am in making more horror movies. So we're kind of in a weird place where maybe we'd be interested in a grand horror comedy, something that was just really fun and funny and like a party movie. That might be exciting. But like, I feel like I've done everything in horror that I wanted to do. So I'm kind of interested in doing other things at this point. The problem is that how do you market that stuff when you're starting out or you're an unknown filmmaker, which we're still unknown quantities to most people. Horror is what gets people's attention because there's that audience out there that will watch every horror film no matter what it is, who made it, how much it cost. Horror is how you get discovered.
Sure.
I feel like we've done enough to where we've kind of hit a wall. And I know Brian has talked about being excited that this movie might have more mainstream appeal. That would be nice if it did get more mainstream appeal because I think I'm to the point where I would like to tell other kinds of stories. So I don't know. It depends on what the muse does over the next. My muse, not the muse in the movie, but I don't know. I'm waiting for my muse to sing to tell me that there's a story worth going to bat for again, because these things are hard. They take so much time, and you could invest so much money into them, and you might not make it back.
Yeah.
So that it's not a lifestyle for me anymore, because it's too hard to have as a lifestyle. But if the right script came along and it was powerful enough, compelling enough, I would absolutely drop everything and commit the next year or so of my life to it. But it has to be really effing good.
You guys, thank you so much for coming on here for this conversation. And the link for the Indiegogo campaign that you can still contribute to, even though they have achieved their goal on it. There's lots of perks on there. They mentioned Blu-ray, special thanks. There's copies of other films of theirs. There's a bunch of different perks for you to take a look at. That's going to be in the show comments. And thank you guys again for coming on and talking shop. It's so fascinating to get into discussion about how the indie world works on a practical basis, because what a lot of people consider to be indie film actually is astronomical by most of our measures financially compared to what you guys are doing, what most of the films that I've ever been part of are doing, which are born out of love and passion and that soul focus you're talking about, Brian, and the drive to do something good, to do something special. And I certainly wish you all the best on Gush. And thank you again for coming on here.
Thanks for having us. It's been very nice.
Yeah, thank you, Justin.
I love getting into the weeds with filmmakers, especially when they're open enough to share their successes as well as their shortcomings. And you can tell with Scott and Brian that they're just very earnest people who are not afraid to lift the veil on the challenges they face as independent filmmakers out there. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. My Patreon for the Radio Hour is at patreon.com/the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. Also, justinbeahm.com is where you can find all the latest news on the projects I'm involved with. There's a lot going on heading into 2025. And thank you so much for listening. As we're heading into this holiday season, just want to remind you to be good to yourself and to each other.
You have been listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. The Radio Hour is a production of Reverend Entertainment, copyright 2024. All rights reserved.